So hello, everyone, and welcome to Academic Jobs Outside the US. This is the third and final webinar in our three-part series on doing Chinese history in a new era. This series is organized by Denise Ho at Yale University and myself, Emily Baum at UC Irvine. We are very excited to be broadcasting to you live from the same location in Southern California, surprise. And this webinar series has been generously sponsored by the Council on East Asian Studies at Yale University and the Long U.S.-China Institute at UC Irvine. We are also very grateful to our long list of co-sponsors. We will just read their names out very quickly right now. They include Harvard University's Fairbanks Center, the Center for East Asian Studies at Stanford University, the Project on China's Global Sharp Power at the Hoover Institution, the Center for Asian Research at York University, the Department of History at Simon Fraser University, the Institute of Asian Research at the University of British Columbia, the East Asian Studies Program at Johns Hopkins, the East Asian Studies Program at UC Santa Cruz, the Global China Center at Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, and the Hong Kong Institute for the Humanities and Social Sciences at the University of Hong Kong. So just a couple of words about how this session will be run before we get started. Each presenter is going to speak for about 10 to 12 minutes, and at the end of the session, we will reconvene for a moderated Q&A. You should all know this by now, but if you have a question at any point in the webinar, please ask it using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. In total, this webinar will last for approximately 75 minutes. We are recording it, and we will be recording only those panelists who have agreed to be recorded, but we will send out a link to the YouTube video in a follow-up email to all registered participants. So be on the lookout for that if you can't make it through the entire session.
So we designed this webinar series with the goal of supporting graduate students and junior colleagues in the Chinese studies field. Last year, one of our webinars addressed the topic of careers outside of academia, and we'll drop that link into the chat. And for that one, panelists spoke about jobs in government, nonprofits, and specialist books. Based on the responses to last year's series, we decided to dedicate one webinar this summer to the topic of searching for jobs outside of the United States. In this session, we are lucky to be joined by 4 scholars of China who will talk about the characteristics of the job market where they're currently teaching, what academic life is like at their university, and what challenges and opportunities their academic systems present. We hope that this panel will be of use not only to scholars of China, but also to candidates on the job market in a wide variety of disciplines. To save time, we'll first introduce all of our speakers briefly. Our second speaker is Tao-Mo Zhou, Assistant Professor in the School of Humanities at Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. She is the author of Migration in the Time of Revolution, China, Indonesia, and the Cold War, out with Cornell University Press in 2019. Our third speaker, Mary Brazelton, is University Senior Lecturer in Global Studies of Science, Technology, and Medicine in the Department of History and Philosophy of Science at the University of Cambridge. She is the author of the book, Mass Vaccination, Citizens' Bodies and State Power in Modern China, published by Cornell University Press in 2019. Finally, Charles Chang is Assistant Professor of Environment and Urban Studies at Duke Kunshan University. He specializes in computation and design, and his publications include articles in the Journal of Chinese History, Political Analysis, and Landscape and Urban Planning.
Hello, everyone. I'm Zhou Tao-Mo. I'm Assistant Professor at Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. Thank you, Emily and Denise, for organizing this event. So I thought it's still unsafe for many of us to travel. So I thought I'd give you a virtual campus tour into Singapore. So here you see the landmark of the University, the Chinese Heritage Center. So I start with talking a little bit about my own experience. So I graduated from Cornell in 2015, went on the job market for 2 years. I was very fortunate to have job offers at the end, but the whole process had been emotionally and physically very draining. So very much echoing to what Ravana said about relevance. As Emily mentioned, my first book is about China, Indonesia, and the Cohort. So I was kind of in this in-between place between the fields of modern China and modern Southeast Asia. Although we have seen the transnational term for more than a decade, most of the jobs, unfortunately, in many parts of the world are still geared towards regional country-specific research. So somehow in Singapore, because of its geographical location, its economic and strategic needs, I was encouraged to kind of cross over between China and Southeast Asia. So Singapore has been my intellectual home for 6 years, 1 year as a postdoc and 5 years as assistant professor. So for those of you who are not familiar with Singapore, I'm just going to briefly run through the academic institutions. So there are 6 major universities and higher education institutions all across the island state. The National University of Singapore, many of you probably have heard about, is the flagship, has the most long-standing prestigious programs in humanities and social sciences. And of course, my own home institute, NTU, will always try to challenge that. Yale NUS College is physically on the NUS campus, but it's autonomous, independent liberal arts college. And then the SMU is more like a business school. It's located downtown, right at the city center. And SUTD, I'm going to talk about them later. These are 2 new universities rapidly expanding their humanities programs. So if you've never been to Singapore, would you pursue an academic career here? So first thing is that the academic system here is modeled on the United States. What does it mean? It means that basically the job application process is similar, right? So now it's standard job talk, 45 minutes. It's an interview with the search committee, which could be either all people of your field or kind of, in my case, they were historians and also social scientists. And the tenure application process is also similar. But the major difference between Singaporean universities and American universities is that most of the institutions here, especially the humanities programs, are very young. They're kind of up and coming. So what does it mean for junior scholars like us? I think it means like it's very bottom heavy. So when I joined my department, there were only 1 or 2 associate professor and only 1 full professor. So we lost that full professor and we're still doing a search for senior faculty in Asian history broadly defined. So it means that you don't have many mentors who could set your path. You need to forge your own path. But the upside of that is that you have like a group of really brilliant, dynamic young colleagues. And I really enjoy brainstorming with my colleagues in the department. And it also means that basically you even got the opportunity as a junior faculty to create your own program. I think this is quite unique in Singapore because the humanities fields are growing very rapidly. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the job opportunities available here. So first, you see the campus of SMU, Singapore Management University, and SUSS. These 2 institutes are probably not that well known outside of Singapore, but they are growing very, very fast. They want to recruit international talents very rapidly. So how would they do that? They will offer really attractive payment. So for example, if later on you see a job advertisement for education track faculty position, just keep in mind that that is substantially different from the adjunct positions in the United States, in the sense that usually the salary is internationally compatible. It's definitely economically viable. You live economically stable life in Singapore. So I think on that, the Singapore system is a lot better. And also, you might also see advertisement for postdoctoral fellowships at ARI, Asia Research Institute. It's also part of the National University of Singapore, but it's kind of semi-autonomous. These kind of positions usually start with a 2 or 3 year contract. However, I've seen many colleagues who kind of smoothly transition from, say, a short-term postdoctoral fellowship to a long-term research position. So you won't be teaching, but it's kind of like a 10-year track research-focused position, which is also economically viable and stable. So now I'm going to advertise for my own university. So here you see our signature building, the Hive. It's also nicknamed the Denson Building, the Xiaolongbao. So NTU is located at the far west end of Singapore. We're almost in Malaysia. So some of you might think that advertisement for this Nanyang assistant professorship. It's a really, really generous package coming with 1 million Singapore dollar research grant. You can still apply to it. The deadline is September 30th, 2021. So this position has been geared more towards engineering and science, natural sciences. However, recently we see a very encouraging sign in the sense that my colleague Florence Mock, a historian of Cohort Hong Kong, got this position. So we are very hopeful that probably university are going to channel more of the funding towards humanities. There is also the presidential postdoc fellowship. So the call is currently closed, but reopen again in January next year. It's a 2-year contract, also coming with a very generous salary research grant. And I think there is also a relocation grant as well. So yeah, would you move here if you've never been to Singapore? How is it really like working here? So I already talked about the advantages, the upside. So some of the issues from what I heard from Ravana, it seems like Singapore system is quite similar to the Hong Kong system, in the sense that this is my university in particular is very tech and science heavy university, right? So as scholar of humanity, you are constantly asked to prove that your research is valuable, right? So this kind of anxiety led to certain inflexibility in terms of your publishing outlets. Basically, my department meticulously ranked all the journals into tier 1, tier 1A, and tier 1B. And I have to like send screenshots of my Google Scholar citation report, like for my annual evaluation. So in other words, when I talked to my colleagues, I found that it's kind of similar to the UK and Australia system, but that's something I never heard about when I was going through my PhD training in the United States. Similar to Hong Kong, there are plenty of funding opportunities around. However, in terms of how to use the grant, the faculty members had less autonomy. So basically you have to meticulous budget, itemize everything, all your grants, and then when you're going to use it, you have to show meticulous documentation when you are seeking reimbursement. So the paperwork is a bit daunting, and that's, I think, that is also very energy sucking, and it's a big time sucker. So that kind of prohibit many of my colleagues from applying for research grants. But having said that, I would still say that Singapore is a great place for scholars like myself, right, who study Chinese migration. And also because Singapore's location, there are lots of great scholars Southeast Asia and South Asia. So that means it's also a great place for those who study intra-Asia connections, right? China-Southeast Asia relations, migration, or China-South Asia relations and migration. And Ramona talked about the linguistic environment in Hong Kong. Similar in Singapore, Singapore is a multilingual society, right? So Mandarin, Malay, and Tamil are all used. So what does it mean for a China scholar? It means that basically you have a wider kind of body of colleagues that you can work with. For example, at NTU, at NUS, there are Chinese departments, right? It's an interdisciplinary program with scholars of literature, of course, of like science and technology studies, and also of history. For example, in NTU history, in NTU Chinese department, we have medical historian Fang Xiaoping, who also wrote about cholera, someone who you can work with. And also it means that you have more kind of students who have the capacity to work on Chinese sources, right? So it's easier, in my case, easier to recruit research assistant who can help me process data in Chinese. And in terms of access to data in mainland China, I will say that basically, I think 2 minutes, yeah, I'll try to wrap it up. In terms of research to data in mainland China, I think in the past, fieldwork is relatively easy. So basically it's easy to travel back and forth. And also I feel like because the political relationship between Singapore and China are more amicable, my informants are more relaxed or less guarded when I tell them I'm a scholar based in Singapore. After COVID, I'm still trying to carry out research through online book purchases, such as from Kongfuzi, or collecting data through my local partners. I think international visibility is the biggest challenge, because in the past you have to do long haul flights, attend AHA or AS. But after COVID, things lots of the events are moving to Zoom, other virtual platform. I feel like there are more opportunities for international collaboration. So that's the end of my presentation. I look forward to comments and questions, and I'll be happy to talk about, for example, how to balance life and work in a place like Singapore. Thank you.
Okay. So as Denise mentioned, my name is Mary Brazelton. I'm a senior lecturer in the Department of History and Philosophy of Science at the University of Cambridge. And if you're attending this session, I'm guessing that you're applying for a postdoc or possibly a permanent academic position in the UK. These comments will be focused more on the latter, simply because that's my experience. So what it's like to go through the process of applying for and then taking up a lectureship in the UK. And I'll start by actually talking rather a lot about logistics before I move on to talking about the academic life and its challenges and benefits, simply because I approach this thinking about what I would have liked to know when I was at the point of making applications like this. So the first thing to note is what a different structure of academic life exists in academic careers. So Taumoa mentioned that Singapore's educational system is modeled on the US. That's not so much the case for the UK. And there's an entirely different vocabulary of job applications as a result. So a lecturer, for example, the starting point of a job is an assistant professor in the US. But in the UK, it's a lecturer. In the UK, traditionally, the title of professor was a senior title that you only received after a career, a lifetime of publishing. And working in scholarship. So there are useful differences of nomenclature to be aware of. There's also, I think, a pretty fundamental difference in terms of the permanent nature of lectureships in the UK as opposed to tenure track positions in the US. In the UK, job security is more disconnected from promotion and advancement. So a lectureship that is permanent has good job security, generally speaking, but promotion is not guaranteed. You have to apply for promotion, sort of going through a series of applications that is different in nature than the tenure system in the US. So I got my position in 2015, and since then I've sat on several search committees. So this is really informed for me by time on both sides of that particular table. One thing to know about applications is that the timeline for applying for and receiving an academic job in the UK works very differently. Often there's a much shorter period between jobs being announced and the interviews being held. It's not necessarily conforming to the academic calendar that we're familiar with. Another difference that I found really fascinating was the fact that in the UK, the norm is that you have all job talks on the same day. And I was actually able to attend all the other job talks for the same position that we were all applying for. In the US, it's quite common to be expected to go out to dinner with the people who are interviewing you. In the UK, we were told as job applicants and candidates for the same job to go and have dinner together without anyone from the department along. So a very different approach, I think, to sociability in that context of job applications. The job talk was also very short. It was 15 minutes, and it was not as important as the formal interview. So the whole process was held over 2 days, and the formal interview on day 2 was a much more kind of formal panel. Along with that, there are significant legal restrictions on what can be asked in those formal interviews in front of a panel. Most of the questions in that interview were, I would say, pretty similar to what you might get in interviews for a North American job in academia. One crucial difference, though, I think, is that demonstrating your ability to get external grant funding is more important. And that's because of a particular difference between North America and the UK in terms of getting funding both for your research and for your postgraduate students. So in the UK, postgraduate students who are working towards PhDs are often supported by external grants, so not university funding, but fellowships or projects. Likewise, the research that academics do is often supported by grants that they have applied for that can be several years in duration and can run into the millions of pounds or euros in value. And so often at the point of application, it's really good to know that that is part of the system, that in many cases, as an academic in the UK, you will be expected to apply for and receive extensive funding from a variety of agencies, some of which I've put on the slide. And this is in part because there aren't necessarily always a lot of research funds available to universities. And so career advancement in many cases is tied to your ability to think in a way that will be conducive to getting really big scale funding and grants that will support not just your work, but postdocs and PhD students for years. Now, if you get to the point of negotiating a position and preparing to actually come to the UK, I think it's probably worth knowing that there are some key differences between North America and the UK system in terms of what's possible to negotiate and what's desirable as a new starter in a position here to negotiate. So it may be quite difficult to negotiate on base things like salaries, but there are other things that are quite important to consider. Notably, I would call attention to visa fees. I think I've missed a slide here, but that's fine. In my experience, relocation packages are really generous, but in some cases you have to pay for your own visa, which can amount to thousands of dollars or pounds. So if you're offered a job and you can negotiate, ask whether the department will cover those fees. Just to give you a sense, I ran the numbers and I found that to go from receiving a job and starting a work visa to the final point of getting permanent residency and even citizenship in the UK, that total amount is about 8,000 to 9,000 pounds, so about 10,000 US dollars. So it's something that if you can get your university to pay for it, and some universities will do this, that would be extremely desirable. Also, there are other aspects of logistics that I'd be happy to talk about in the Q&A, but I have a timer and I see that I'm quickly running out of time. So I'd like to transition to talk a bit more about some of the less tangible aspects of jobs in the UK. So first, just some interesting differences of academic life. It was really fascinating to move to the UK and realize that certain concepts and conceptual frameworks could be very, very different. So in the UK, empire matters hugely as a category of historical analysis. And in some respect, studies of non-Western regions or histories can be assumed or even just read as studies of empire, and especially of British Empire. This has been interesting to navigate as a historian of China, especially as British universities embrace projects of decolonization. And that's something I'm happy to speak about a bit more if there's time, this kind of idea of decolonizing the curriculum. But one of the points that I do find myself making over and over in my teaching is that Britain wasn't the only empire of the world, and that empires aren't only ever Western. Anyway, that it may be worth noting. But given that what non-Western history is read often as imperial history, area studies can work a little bit differently as a result. So often I'm surprised to find that people in the UK think of China as part of Southeast Asia instead of East Asia. Coming from North America, where that you have those interesting regional boundaries, that can be interesting to explore, even though, of course, these categories are themselves historically contingent in all kinds of ways. But in general, I think you see ideas of Asia being tied much more strongly to South Asia in really fascinating ways. And again, I'm happy to talk about that more in the Q&A. Other points to note, Talmoa had mentioned the points about things like evaluations of your research and teaching, being tied to certain kinds of publications and metrics. That connects to something in the UK called the Research Excellence Framework, the metrication, the ways in which your publications are evaluated by your peers often and regulated. And this happens every 5 years, the ref. I'm at Cambridge, and Cambridge and Oxford are two universities in the UK that I would say try to protect their academics from the ref in all kinds of useful ways. But it is something that's important to know about if you are applying for a job, because it is something that you're expected to publish a certain number of papers for each ref evaluation. And so that often becomes part of planning. So I don't want to go on for too long. I want to mention very briefly some challenges and some positive aspects. But I will note as well that there are, well, I'll start with the positive, which is that there's just briefly the costing that I ran up. So coming to £9,000 for a full visa and permanent residency. So one of the wonderful things about life in the UK is the particular kind of academic sociability. It's a really intense and wonderful approach to academic life, I think, in all kinds of ways. And again, I'm happy to talk about that a bit more in the Q&A. But that said, there are challenges. Life in the UK in all kinds of ways can take a lot to adjust to. The weather takes a lot to adjust to. The very, very short daylight hours in the winter take a lot to adjust to. As an American working on Chinese history in the UK, that effectively means that life is split between 3 continents, and that is something that others might find as well. Your research and the focus of your study is in East Asia, in China. Your family perhaps is in North America, and your job and your life are in Europe. So it can be complicated by things like the outbreak of a global pandemic. There are cultural differences that people can sometimes laugh about, like the differences in terminology. But I've been really struck by the ways in which you can have a conversation with someone in the context of British academia, and as you can see from this graphic that I've depicted, what you think is happening might actually come across totally differently to somebody in the British system. I think I'm keenly aware that I'm running out of my allotted 12 minutes. So I just want to note that there are particular challenges at the moment in the UK. I never thought when I came to Britain that I would be in a position to strike and to join a union and participate in an industrial action. But in 2017 or 2018, and then again last year, that is what I found myself doing as part of the Universities and Colleges Union, particularly as part of a pushback across the sector against issues with pensions for UK university staff. And so that dispute is still ongoing, but as with many other places, the working conditions of teaching staff in the UK are under constant pressure from corporatizing interests. And so that too has been a feature, not just of my life as an employee of a university, but also as a teacher in talking through these issues with my students in a really fascinating way. So the thing that I will end on is simply to note that one of the really lovely benefits of my time in the UK has been exploring a really rich world of sources. I'm so fortunate to be at Cambridge, where the Needham Research Institute is located, with a variety of really great archives, in particular for history of science and medicine in China. But there are so many more sources that I wouldn't have necessarily been so aware of if I hadn't been at Cambridge, where there's so many valuable aspects of things like the National Archives, the Foreign Office Archives, that shed light on Chinese history, especially in the 20th century, in really fascinating ways. So I will stop there, but thanks very much for your time.
All right. I think this is my turn. Let me share my screen. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Charles Chang. I'm at Duke Kunshan University, or DKU. I think you've learned a lot from our other panelists, which show the institutions in Asia and Europe in general. I think it would be helpful if I can briefly introduce my university, which is a university in China, and which might be quite different from other universities. Our university is a kind of like is a liberal arts university in China. That is to say, it's very different from the Chinese universities in that it completely modeled after American institutions, namely Duke. It's very small and competitive, and it's research oriented. Generally, it's a joint venture university set up by Duke University and the Wuhan University, and it is located in Kunshan. Some people ask where Kunshan is kind of like a small county level city. That it has been the richest county in China for the past 15 years. So Kunshan has a lot of advanced manufacturing industry, and the local government think that it would be a great idea to promote higher education in a sense. So at the new university, we enjoyed a generous support from the local government. So what is DKU's mission? So Duke Kunshan University, like I said, is a liberal arts university. Our mission is to introduce a world-class liberal arts education to China, and we want to educate classes of international talents. So that is very different from a traditional, Chinese university that is research-based. It's very similar to the liberal arts colleges in the United States. We also want to promote the innovation of higher education and support high caliber research and academic excellence. And I will talk a little bit about that in terms of the differences from the DKU and the American liberal arts colleges. So in terms of its size, we are quite small. We have 14 undergraduate majors, 5 master's program. We have currently 130 faculties. This is in the year of 2019, and almost 900 undergraduate students. We're still expanding. So, we want to keep the faculty and student ratio to 1:6 or 1:7, and potentially we will have about 2,000 undergraduate students, which means that we will probably still recruit a fairly large number of full-time tenure-track faculty. Like I said, our core mission is a liberal arts education. So we want to educate our undergraduate students to have a purposeful life, have a rooted globalism, meaning that we have probably 60% of students come from all over the world. So we want to cultivate an international culture where a student can learn from one another, and the undergrad liberal arts education is the core, meaning that we, as full-time faculty, we do not get pressure to pursue academic funding in China or publish certain journals by some kind of metrics. In a way, we are encouraged to do research, but it's not mandatory for your tenure case. In terms of the undergraduate education, we have a bit different structure. We have a couple of features that are different from a lot of universities in the US, in that we have an intensive 7-week term. So in total, we have 4 terms per academic year, but each term is only 7 weeks long. And for undergraduate students, they normally just take 2 courses and learn all these kind of things in 7 weeks. And instead of the department structure, we have the divisional area of knowledge. So we only have 3 big divisions: the divisions of arts and humanities, divisions of social science, and division of natural and applied science. So that is because we want to encourage interdisciplinary studies, so that we do not want to silo faculty in just one division. So for the undergraduate education, the students were asked to take the common core courses, which includes, for example, a little bit of Chinese history and culture, and for example, the philosophical thinking, and etc. etc. So in that case, the student who's educated in the Chinese system would know more of the Western ideas and philosophy, as well as China's place in the world. And then they also take language courses. So for Chinese students, they have to take English courses to improve their English. And then they were asked to take divisional courses and interdisciplinary courses. And also the undergraduate students normally spend 1 year in abroad in a university, either in the US or other part of the world. Most of them went to Duke because that is a easy way for them to get this kind of credit exchanged, and then in the fourth year they return to DKU to continue and finish their study. Because we're so new, so we actually do not have any undergraduate students who have graduated yet. This coming year will be the first cohort of our students. So that is the teaching and the education part of the DKU. I also want to give you an idea about the campus. So currently we are literally building our university. We are going to build like in 5 phases of the campus, which in total going to be about 200 acres of land. But currently we have the phase 1 completed. So we only have a couple buildings, but they are all designed by a company and the buildings are certified by LEED Green Campus. So that means we are breathing kind of like high quality air that is comparable to Los Angeles, perhaps. And we are expanding to the phase 2. So this year, the phase 2 of the campus will be complete, and in the phase 2 we will have libraries, gymnasium, and as well as faculty and student apartments. So in a way, DQ's gonna be much nicer in this coming year. Okay, so in the end, I want to talk a little bit about this hiring process, which you might be very interested in. So the hiring process at DKU is not very different from the hiring process in American universities, in that we have 3 rounds of the interview. The first round is just like it's conducted remotely. It's just like any universities in the US. The second round is the interview with DKU's leadership. You will be asked to talk about your research fate into this DKU's interdisciplinary environment and how you see yourself in teaching in terms of the curriculum at DKU. The third round is quite different from what you get in the US, in that we would invite the potential candidates for a campus visit during the winter break. But because normally every year for these years, we are hiring 20 to 30 tenure track faculty since we're expanding. So we would invite all the candidates to the campus in the same time. And this process is not to create a competitive environment between candidates, because potentially if you are like strong candidates, DQ can potentially hire all of them, right? All of you. So in a way, this process is rather trying to observe everyone in terms of how well you would work with existing faculty at DKU, and how you can handle, for example, teamwork. So this on-campus visit will take about 2 days where you will give a 15 minutes job talk, and you also will form a team to create a sort of a imaginative major and explain why you want to do that. That is a bit different from the interview process in the United States. And once you get hired, DKU offers a competitive salary, and a startup fund and the generous benefits comparable to the US institutions. The typical teaching load is the typical teaching load is 5 courses per academic year. However, currently we are on the 4 courses per academic year, and the teaching's a bit flexible. So in that case, you could arrange your teaching into 2 semesters that are most convenient for you, and spend some time in it for your own research. And lastly, I want to say that in terms of applying to the jobs at DKU, sometimes people don't realize that unlike the application in the US, where you have to be very clear fit to a position, sometimes because DKU is expanding, so DKU is willing to be a little bit flexible in terms of the job applications. So if you are a strong candidate and you see a position that is related to you, however, may not be extremely related, you still should apply, because in a way, maybe DKU could fit you into another position that they are trying to expand to. So in a way, there's possibility that if the position that you're applying is not completely a clear fit to you. The last, I want to mention that I really enjoy teaching at DKU, strangely, because here the students are highly motivated and they are eager to learn. Even in the field of humanities, students are very interested. Also, the staff is highly motivated. I've never received email reply more than 24 hours at DKU. All the staff try to be very helpful. And in the end, also my colleagues are very young as well, and I very much enjoy the environment where everybody's trying to build their academic career. Of course, we have many problems, especially during this COVID pandemic as a young university. However, I think the academic environment is very encouraging, and at least I enjoy this young and invigorating environment. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all of our panelists. I deeply enjoyed all of your presentations and recruiting style as well. We have some questions in the Q&A and in the chat. If you did ask a question in the chat, please go ahead and move it to Q&A, since we'll focus on those. We'll start with a few questions that address all of the panelists, and then we'll go to questions that focus on particular individuals. So a first question from our audience is a 2-part question for everyone. Why did you apply for jobs outside of the US? And does your future plan involve returning to the US in an academic capacity?
Well, I can get started. So when I graduated, I applied everywhere. So I landed in Singapore largely because that was the only offer I received. And I think one of the reasons I didn't get to talk about it, but I think Singapore or Asia in general is a good environment for working mothers, especially academics with small children, in the sense that childcare is less expensive and it's affordable to hire helpers or nannies. So I do find that's a big attraction for me. Another thing I think is close to family, because I was born and raised in China. My parents are now in Shenzhen. It's only 4 hours flight away. So for me, I think it's whether going, my friends always ask me, are you planning to go back to the US? In my case, probably for family reason, not in the foreseeable future. I'd be happy to hear what the other colleagues.
Yeah, I can go next. When I apply my apply positions, I also applied everywhere. I got 16 job interviews in the United States for tenure track positions. I have 2 job offers in the end, but I choose DKU. I think I got some difficulties in the US because my background is a bit interdisciplinary. And normally in the US, the difficulty is that if you're interdisciplinary, you have to try really hard to fit into a department environment, which it's very difficult for me. So in the end, I feel that a lot of positions in the US were not a good fit for me. And also, I spent pretty much most of my academic career in the United States. And last year when I applied jobs at DKU, I feel like because I studied China and I spent too much time in the US, I feel my research is a bit out of touch. In a way that I do need to do some kind of field work to get to know the situation on the ground. So I decided to move back to China. I have families back in Wisconsin, United States, so I do visit my family. As to the future, I don't know. I think it all depends on my research. If I think it's a good idea to move, then I will. But so far, I've been having a good time in China, and I'm happy not to move.
So maybe I can go next quickly and just say why I decided to apply. Like everyone else, I applied everywhere. And I was really, really lucky in that basically my dream job and in the best department that I could hope for came up the year that I was applying, and I got really, really lucky. And I am someone who trained in a history of science program. And so for me to be able to get a job in a department of history and philosophy of science the chances of that were vanishingly rare. So for me to be able to continue to work in an academic community that was organized around that field of the history of science was really, really precious. And so for me, that was absolutely why, it was barely a decision to have to make to apply. And then, so that's really my answer, is that that was what I would have, the best I could have really hoped for, I think.
Thank you all for those responses. We have a question from Kehan Nahad, who says, thank you for this very informative panel. How can scholars studying topics outside the bounds of East Asian and Southeast Asian studies position themselves competitively for employment in these regions? Or maybe how about for employment at your institution?
Okay, I can get started since you mentioned Southeast Asia. So for Singapore, Singapore has been a very cosmopolitan place, but I think after pandemic, we see similar trends all around the world. It's becoming more insular. So that tendency also affects how you position yourself when applying for a job in Singapore. So for Southeast Asians and I think it's generally, Singapore is generally very friendly to Southeast Asians because Southeast Asia is strategically important to Singapore. How you can tailor your project, for example, if you can effectively tailor your project to some of the governmental agendas in Singapore, meaning, for example, smart cities, urban development, science and technology, intra-Asia regional connectivity. I think these are the key words. So for example, I mentioned earlier, my colleague Florence Mock, who recently got this Nanyang assistant professorship, I think she's very savvy in framing her project, not just as about Hong Kong, it's about decolonization, and it's also about urban development in the global cities of Asia. So definitely cater it more towards some of the official agenda in Singapore is very important, not just for job application, but also for ground application as well.
I can go next. So at DKU, I don't think studying something outside of Asia is a problem, because we sometimes intentionally hire faculty who teaches areas outside of Asia. For example, we have faculty who teach American politics, and that is the appealing part, because we try to promote international higher education, and our students are very interested in knowledges, something like, you know, even Judaism, or even, you know, European history. So in a way, it's not a disadvantage if you study something that is not based in Asia.
Maybe I can follow the same order as the previous question. So just for the part of the UK, to be honest, I think my advice on this question would be to just pay very close attention to the department or faculty that is advertising the job, which I realize is quite general advice, but I think it's particularly applicable in a case like Cambridge or other UK universities where the institutional configurations can be very unique. So, for example, at Cambridge, the history faculty up until recently had one person working on Southeast Asia who connected to various aspects of overseas Chinese communities, Rachel Liu, whose work I'm sure I'm underselling in all kinds of ways. But most of the teaching in what we would consider Asian history was happening in the Faculty of Asian and Middle Eastern Studies. So a totally different faculty, and I think possibly even a separate school within the university. And there wasn't any kind of, and my position was created de novo, new, in history and philosophy of science. So it really, I think, is probably just a lesson to think carefully about the department that's advertising the position and how your work would fit into the existing faculty's research interests and themes, really, as much as anything. So,
thank you. We actually have two questions about where you find job announcements outside of the US. So I wonder if we could go around and just, in a quick list, name the top sites where you found postings about either your positions or international positions.
So I think we all check the HNET. I've been away from the job market for a while, so I'm not familiar, right? HNET. But I agree, like some of the universities outside the US are not very consistent with posting all their jobs on these platforms. So I'd be happy to send the links to the two positions I talked about at my home institution. And another thing I recently found very useful is academic Twitter. So lots of job posts I got notified on Twitter in firsthand.
Yes, I did the same thing. I look at jobs at HNET, and I also joined a lot of mailing lists, as well as looking through this job posting at different kind of associations website. Also, I just use Google a lot. Actually, there's a lot of jobs if you just search your field and then tenure track on Google, and that would pop up a lot of information. So I look at that as well.
So there's one website for UK academic jobs where I think all of them are posted, which is jobs.ac.uk. And that gives you a smorgasbord of different options, and you can filter it as needed. But that's what I would normally direct people to for looking at UK positions.
Thank you so much for this. I see that we're almost out of time. I was thinking that perhaps we could ask one teaching and one research question that any one of you can respond to if you like. It doesn't have to be everyone. But we have a question from Joshua Tan. What are some of the challenges and opportunities regarding teaching or course design for non-US contexts? In other words, are the syllabi that you've designed in the US are they relevant, and how did you adapt yours?
I think being in Asia allow you to teach more niche topics because the students they really have a good background knowledge about the region in their pre-university level education. For example, I teach topics such as modern Indonesia, World War II in Southeast Asia. These topics probably are not really pragmatic in the Western context. But in terms of the general curriculum, such as Introduction to Asia Pacific, I found it really interesting to reframe some of the debates and topics in the Asia context, in the sense that you don't, what we teach, what we research are usually framed by the political discourse or the larger political context where we're situated. So it's kind of fun to rework on these frameworks and reshape for example, the discussion question or debate topics. But I think the general, in the question, what do you read or work on during your qualification exam, that's still very useful. But you probably need to frame it in a different way.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to chime in on teaching?
I was just going to briefly say that teaching at Cambridge and more generally in the Oxford system is so weird and unusual that I had to learn a whole new vocabulary where, students aren't in years, they're in part 2 or part 3. And I think for me, the biggest change was giving many fewer lectures, and therefore having to squeeze and compress a lot more material very quickly, especially because the very specialized nature of the UK educational system means that students only study a few topics in depth before going to university. And so they have a lot of really intense knowledge about several topics, but not necessarily a breadth of knowledge, not necessarily very much knowledge at all about Asia or Asian history in particular. So that can be a challenge, but also really fascinating and rewarding in different ways.
Thank you so much for that.
I think for me, it's because China and the US are so different. So sometimes my students do not know certain things that have been censored by the Chinese government. So in my class, I would actually teach them, I would mention things like Tiananmen Square event and among other things, and I would encourage my students to use Google instead of Baidu, if you can imagine that they're in China. Other than that, actually, I found that students are really interesting. Once they started to learn this kind of stuff, they feel very, inspired, and they tend to ask me a lot of questions about, things that we taught in, either in Chinese history or in a Western philosophy, something like that. And that part is it's a great rewarding experience for me.
Thank you so much for sharing those experiences. Let's ask a final research question that I will tag on a couple of the individual questions. So an anonymous attendee asks about human subjects research infrastructure protocol in your institution. For example, if you use ethnographic methods. So that's a question directed for the whole panel.
I think doing research in China is great because in a way, you can do your field work all the time by just talking to people and trying different kind of things. The recent crackdown on academia does not really affect us much. Frankly, when we designed DKU, I learned that we pretty much want to protect academic freedom at DKU, meaning that you teach whatever you like to teach, and in the end, DQ will defend you if that is seen as problematic by the Chinese government. But of course, when you are speaking outside of DKU, you will have to take a personal risk in terms of what you say and what you do. But my experience is that I do research on religion, and for example, early this year I visited Kashgar and Peking and etc., and I didn't find it problematic at all. So in a way, if you learn those kind of things over time, you would understand a little bit better about the boundaries there. In terms of the kind of like a research environment, in regarding to the IRB. We are trying to innovate IRB a little bit. We try to keep the IRB as rigorous, just like in the US institutions, just because we have to protect human subjects in general, especially in China. But we also want to innovate it a bit in case you do something with regard to, for example, social media, because you know, the American system did not probably had much enough about IRB regarding to social media as well. So if you do something related to social media and computation at DKU, you will get probably a speedier IRB process compared to that same process in the United States, just because we had some new innovations regarding that.
Okay, well, we have gone over time, so I think I'm going to wrap this up. But once again, I would like to thank all of our wonderful panelists for their super informative and very interesting talks. We'd like to thank the Council on East Asian Studies, especially Stephanie Kim and Richard Sosa, for providing all of the staffing and support for this event. And of course, we would like to thank all of you for tuning in. So thank you to all of our supporters for making this summer webinar series a huge success. All the best for the rest of your summers, and hopefully we will see you again next year. So take care, everyone.